Hey there, thanks for tuning in to The View from Monkey's Eyebrow. We are broadcasting out of Joe's Place in Monkey's Eyebrow, located in Ballard County, Kentucky. We'll be talking with the folks who live in Ballard County. They are some of the most fascinating characters, and will share some of the most interesting stories you'll ever hear. By the time they're done, you might even want to live here. Your host is Joe Culver.
I started my life's journey a little more than 79 years ago, first living in the town of Wycliffe, Kentucky. And later, my dad built a house out on what then was 440, I believe, and it was gravel. Yeah. Today it's 121 and it's paved, and you don't have nearly the amount of dust that we got back in those days. But we were somewhat isolated. I had brothers and sisters, that there weren't many other children that lived nearby. Hub and Myrtle Copeland lived just up the road, and their grandson, Eddie Fay, lived with them. And down the road going toward Mayfield, the Morrises lived. And the Morrises had a daughter whose name is Teresa, and Teresa Morris Salonimer is with us here today, and we're going to have a good conversation. Good morning, Teresa.
Good morning, Joe.
Is that house the first one that the only one you lived in growing up?
No, we lived on Beech Grove Road for approximately 7 years before we moved out on 440. And the house is still standing, actually. It's one of the few that didn't get torn down when Westvaco moved in here. And it's a rental property now, and they've broken the land up into several different parcels. So it's a lot different from what it was when I was there.
Yeah. Everything changes.
It's true.
But you go down that road, and I still have memories.
Yes,
when
definitely. All the different people that lived there. That was a busy road at one time.
Yes, it was. Is the traffic let up some?
Oh, definitely. There's not nearly as many cars on the far end of it going toward 121 as there were when we were growing up.
Okay.
But yeah, there's not many people live there past the old Anderson house now. Most of those have been torn down and demolished.
Tell us about your parents and how they were, what they did.
Well, my dad was a mail carrier for approximately 34 years. He worked in the post office after he came back from law school. His first wife had died, and he came on home, and rather than going on, he started working in the post office as a civil servant.
And he had a name?
Charles Morris.
He had
Charles
a nickname.
Henry. His nickname was Block, and that had come about from early childhood. He would not let a little girl get into the swing that he was setting in, so she called him a blockhead, and the name just took on from there. Everybody had nicknames back then, so Daddy was Block, and that's all I'd have to say is I'm Block Morris's girl, and they knew who I was.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing much of anybody call him Charles.
No, except his mother did.
Did she?
Yeah.
And who was your mother?
My mother was Mary Alline Strong. She was brought up by her grandparents, Hetty and Thomas Walter Payne, down in what we called the Flat at that time. Mm-hmm. That's where City Park is now. And that was a whole community within itself down there. A lot of good people.
You mentioned your dad being a mail carrier. It seemed like the Morrises and friends and relatives pretty much dominated the post office.
They did. That was before the time of what do you call nepotism, when that came in. So Uncle Bill was the postmaster. Daddy was a carrier. Uncle Bill's brother-in-law, through his wife Lavora, was one of the clerks in the office. A cousin, Leon Fowler, was another distant cousin. But back then, just about everybody in town was related in some way or fashion by marriage or by blood. So when Mother came along, she started out as a part-time clerk. Hayden Owens was the one that brought her on. And Uncle Bill took her out to Kevel to take her test. And she came on when she was 18 years old and started part-timing and did that all the way until probably I was in about the 6th grade, and then she went on as a full-time clerk. And so she was clerk in the post office, Daddy was a mail carrier, and Uncle Bill was postmaster. And a distant cousin was another clerk. So I grew up in the post office. I can still hear the chickens in the back when they would ship those in from out of state.
Were you ever there when Bill Ryan's Chesapeake Ike came down and fetched the mail?
No, I was usually in school about the time he'd come down. He'd come down just as Carroll Evening Citizen was coming in and come to the back door. I've got pictures of Ike, though, and remember him from all the stories that I heard about him.
Didn't you have an uncle who maybe was a judge or a...
My granddaddy.
Granddaddy.
My granddaddy. Well, I've got a cousin who was a judge up in Illinois, but my granddaddy was judge executive of Ballard County back in the 30s, and he was also a lawyer and also an insurance man. That was Ben B. Morris. And
Now you went through elementary and high school in Ballard County.
yes, I went to Wycliffe, and then after Wycliffe, I went on to Ballard Memorial.
Did you go to college?
I went a few years to college. I went my first year to Lambeth in Jackson, Tennessee. Then I came home and I worked a while at Sun Lane IGA. It had just opened in Wycliffe about that time. Bud Winkler had a store over in Cairo, and he decided to open one over here in Wycliffe. Fred Hardy built it for him. And that just recently got demolished. And they've torn that down, going to build another store there, I hear. But after that, I went to PCC for a while, Paducah Community College, and then to Murray for a little while.
Was your IGA job the only one you had in Ballard County?
No, I worked for Fred's Barbecue back when I was about 17 years old, making $1 an hour, and I worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. So I'd made $60 for all that time.
I believe I made $1 an hour when I was working at the Ancient Buried City.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Guiding tours and stuff.
Yeah.
They were very generous with us in those days.
Of course, you got to keep your tips, too.
But we didn't get tips at Buried City.
Well, we'd get a dime maybe. You know, people didn't tip around here. You just knew everybody, so they didn't really tip you like they do now.
I don't know what what a dinner would cost at Fred's, but if you tipped 20%, it probably still wasn't all that much.
No, I think our sandwiches were anywhere from $75 to $1.25 back then. And
Teresa, I know that most of your working life was spent in other places than at Ballard County. Can you tell us some about that?
well, after I met my husband and we married, he was in the Navy, so we got transferred to Great Lake, Illinois. And there I started into my civil service career. Daddy always told me that if I didn't get a college degree, to make sure that I went into civil service. So that's exactly what I did. I went into civil service, and I had 27 years of civil service work. Started out in military payroll in Great Lakes. From there, we got transferred to Norfolk, and I went into civilian payroll, and then into supply. And most of my latter career was spent in the supply area as either inventory specialist or quality assurance or quality control. And that's where I retired from, quality assurance.
Well, when did you retire, and why did you decide to come back to Ballard County?
Well, we were getting ready to make some transitions in the civil service world, as they're always making different adjustments. They offered us an early retirement, and we had 3 days to make up our mind. And so in 2004, they said, okay, here's the layout. You get $25,000 if you retire, and if you have 20 years of service. Well, I already had 27. My boss job was disappearing. It was being abolished and being absorbed by another command. And since he was leaving, and I thought he was outstanding as a supervisor, I just said, okay, if you're going, I'm going too. So I took my $20,000 and I hit the road. But we thought John might get an early retirement. He was working for the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard or it's actually the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, but it was in Portsmouth. And he didn't get an early out, so we couldn't just pack up and come home. Daddy had died in 1992, and Mother was living back here by herself at the farm. And, of course, I was concerned about her. So we tried to find a local civil service job in the area and couldn't find any. So we stayed out there, and I went to work for the church. I spent 5 years working as a secretary at church.
What church?
It was the let's see, what did they call it? It was a non-denominational Pentecostal church that was based out of Bethel Temple in Hampton, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
So we had it was a small church, just an upstart church in one of the lower economic areas of the community. And it was interesting work. You got to meet a lot of different people. But after that 5-year stint, John still didn't get an early retirement, so we just bided our time, more or less, and stayed in Norfolk and would come home twice a year to take care of Mother, make sure she was okay. And then after she passed away in 2000, we were determined to come back home. We just had the feeling that this is where we belonged. And I'm very much oriented to the land. Having land ownership to me is the ultimate. So wanted to come back to the farm and keep the farm in the family. And that's what we did. We came back home when John finally got retirement age.
When you said you came back home, you actually came home. You came back to the same house.
I came back to the same house,
and
yes.
the same farm.
Right.
And you still have that farm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You have mentioned John a couple of times. That's John or Jonathan Salonimer.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, he is a Jew or Jewish, or I don't know the correct way to say it. But you grew up in Wycliffe, and I don't think we had a Jewish community.
No.
In fact, did one of your relatives or uncles, wasn't he a minister?
Yes, Uncle Bill. He was a Christian disciple of Christ minister. My great-grandfather was a disciple of Christ minister. All of Mother's uncles were Baptist ministers. So we got a lot of ministers in the family. If they weren't lawyers, they were ministers. So you got the two extremes.
Tell me about the adjustments that you may have had to make to be married to John.
Well, when John and I married, he did not acknowledge his Jewishness. Now, he is, I think DNA says he's about 25% Jew. He had Jewish blood from both mother and father. But John was brought up as a reorganized Latter-day Saint, which is a division of the Mormons.
Right.
And he was unhappy in that. So we stayed away from church for many, many years until I got sick with bulimia. And then we got back into wanting a spiritual walk. And John got saved in a Pentecostal church. So we stayed Pentecostal for, probably about 10 years of John's new walk with the Lord. And he started recognizing that his family was Jewish. And in Norfolk, you have what we call Messianic Jews. Mm-hmm. Messianic Jews are people of Jewish heritage that have found the Lord Jesus Christ as their Savior and recognize Him as the Messiah. So basically, we are what we call Messianic Jews. And those are Jews that are believers that Jesus is the Son of God, which is not really that different from the theology that I was brought up with. So we haven't had any problems in that way. Now, our walk with the Lord has been different here, basically because we practice the biblical feasts that are in the Bible: Passover, Shavuot, Hanukkah, the different ones like that most of the churches around here don't recognize. But as far as our basic beliefs are pretty much the same.
Does it or didn't John have a radio program where he?
He did for a while. He was on WBCE. Reverend Wendell Gray owns the radio station, and he allowed John to do some preaching on there. And now John preaches in the jail again. He had a jail ministry back in Virginia for many, many years, and now he's back in the jail here in Wycliffe, and he loves that.
Back in the jail,
Yeah.
sounds pretty.
He said the first time he ever went in the jail, he was scared to death. He didn't know what was going to happen, but now he thrives when he's in there preaching.
My grandfather and my grandmother and my Uncle Billy Bob were jailers
Yes.
in the old jail in Ballard County.
I
And as
remember
a
that.
child, I spent some time in those cells myself. It was a lot different back then.
Yeah, much different.
My grandmother Christ, whatever she cooked for the family for a meal, that's what the inmates got too.
Right. It's not like that now.
No. I know you and John have been very active in things around the community. Can you talk some about some of those?
Well, of course, my passion is genealogy, as you well know, and so I'm a member of the Ballard Carlisle Historical and Genealogical Society. I'm also a volunteer at the Ballard Carlisle Public Library, which is open on Fridays, 9 to 4, and we're all volunteer staff there. So, and then we have another organization that we just started up. It's the Ballard County Society for Historical Preservation, and that was basically started to save the old Methodist Church
Right.
there in Wycliffe. And we raise funds to do what we can to preserve the building for now and hopefully restore it to a usable building in the future.
Did you or John help staff up at the Cross?
John does that. He's up there 2 days a week, staffing the Cross in the Volunteer Center and meeting the visitors that coming in and telling them a bit about the local community that he's learned from all of us.
Do they have many visitors there?
No, not many, but we do get some from different regions of the world. John had some Chinese in there not too long ago. He couldn't speak to them, but he could more or less sign language and get the message across. And I think Rodney Dennis is also staffing up there, and I think he's had some to come in from Germany. And of course, Rodney was stationed in Germany, so he could speak with them a bit and enjoyed that.
When I was working at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, I very often took visitors on tours of some of the facilities, and I did have a group of Chinese scientists one time that I took, but they had a interpreter with them, and it was a little awkward, but that was better than trying to speak Mandarin or anything. like that.
Exactly.
When you involved with the Historical Society and the genealogy and the library, do you get very many requests from people looking for information?
Oh, my goodness, yes. And, of course, also being on Ancestry.com, I get a lot of inquiries there because my family tree on Ancestry is not just my particular line. I've developed more of a community tree. So anyone that I research, I put on there. So I'm getting a lot of requests from people in Michigan, Canada, just all over the United States. When they see a name pop up that's familiar to them, they ask me how I'm related, and I say, well, I'm not really related, but I was doing research, and so that information is there. And I love research. I just absolutely love research. You give me a topic and I'm ready to dig in.
A lot of these roles that you've talked about involve, to some extent, looking back, involve the past. If you think about Wycliffe and Ballard County, where do you think that we're headed into the future?
Well, I was thinking about that question because I know you had sent me a list of things to think about. And I really have a hard time with that one because seeing the way the county has moved from the small towns the little localities, the little communities within the towns, how much we've lost there, and knowing how we're moving forward and expanding out, losing our old stores, losing our old buildings. The county's being centralized more toward the center of the county. It seems to me like we've lost a lot of our foundation. You don't have the community that you once did. The people are still there, but that feeling of being united as a little community has gone. And now we're more in competition with the other counties rather than being competition within the county itself, if that makes any sense. It seems like it's more political than it used to be as far as a division in politics, ways of thought. I just think we've lost a lot, and I don't know if we're going to get that back.
I don't think we can get a lot of it back. I know when I was growing up in Wycliffe, you had a lot of stores you could go to, buy groceries,
Yes.
buy clothes. You could go down, you're talking about the flat, go down to Maud Shepherd's store and get some things, all around it. And the, I guess, economy of scale and good highways have stopped that. Now we can go to Paducah, we can go to Nashville, St. Louis, Cape
Right.
Girardeau, and I don't think we can ever recover the retail and the stuff. I know Wycliffe has had a few advances.
Yes.
And I understand they're getting a grocery store, and they've had some. And I don't know what small towns are going to have to do. Maybe rely on specialty types of shops, if anything.
Yes.
But I don't think we can go back to what it was like.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad.
It is sad. I think you've lost a lot there. Drugs have taken over a big thing in Ballard County too. That's another thing that we didn't have to deal with when we were kids. I mean, if you had a beer back then, you were, that was awful. But now there's so much drug involvement in the area, and I think that's been brought in from a lot of the outlying areas, the bigger towns.
Well, plus it's almost a crossroads there in Wycliffe.
Right.
You have major cities in almost every direction, and a lot of those.
At one time, that corner up there where Green Street and 51 and 60 intersect, that was considered the busiest four-way stop in the United States. And I can remember when I was a little girl hearing the big trucks, because my grandmother lived right up there where Napa is now. And you could hear the trucks constantly going to Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, wherever.
And you still have a lot. I know
Yes.
They had a fire the other day, and a semi tried to go around it and got, I guess, wedged in.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's amazing how many cars back up.
Exactly.
With all of these things, the post office, the Navy, your work in genealogy and history, surely you've got a couple of good stories you could share with us.
Oh, I think you've got all the good stories, Urban Hughes and Bill Ryan and all of those. So I think you're the king there.
Well, doggone it, if you don't have any good stories, then I guess I just want to thank you for coming and overcoming the nervousness you said you felt and doing a really good job. I've enjoyed talking with you.
I always love talking to you, Joe.
All right, thank you.
And that's today's view as seen from Joe's Place in Monkey's Eyebrow. Please visit us again next time.